Welcome to the We Are All Dying podcast. My name is Jenna Goodhand, and my hope is that through these conversations, we become more comfortable, confident, competent, and curious talking about death. On today's show, I chat with Erica Buist. She is a features writer for The Guardian, a creative writing teacher, and the author of the book, This Party's Dead. She is currently working on her second book, an escape thriller called Venus Flytrap, and researching her third, a novel about fraudulent mediumship. She lives in London with her screenwriter partner, a deaf dog, a mighty cat, and a rich abundance of ADHD. This is so exciting for me. I loved your book so much.
Oh,
When I
thanks.
found it, I was like, I wanted this book. Like I wanted to find this book, and then you just happened to have written it. So
That's actually why I wrote it, because I was looking for it and
amazing.
it wasn't there. So I was like, oh, this is going to take ages. So
So one of the things that I ask first, and it's up to you whether you kind of pick the, the catalyst, I guess, for the book or a different story. But when did death show up in your life, or when do you remember your earliest death, and realizing, okay, this is temporary for all of us living beings? When did that kind of show up for you?
yeah, actually, there's one moment that's actually in the book, which is this really was the very first one, and this is where I found out that people die. And it was my father who revealed this information. I think in the book I put it as with all the tact of a rhinoceros crapping on a drum. Like he just, I can't remember what led into it, but it may well have been that I, like many other small children, suddenly shouted out the words, I'm never going to die. This is apparently quite common for kids when the first sort of shards of awareness kind of make their way in, they just go, "No," and just shout out. So it's possible that that's what I'd done. But my dad said, yeah, you will. Everyone does. And I went, mm. And my first concern was, I said, you won't die though, Daddy. And he said, of course I will. And then I, of course, went, what? Because I was about, 3 or something at the time. And he the way he tried to pull it back was to let me know that everyone dies and it won't be till ages away, and also one day the sun will explode and then everything will die. And it was I got all this information in the space of a couple of minutes. And I think later I heard the cancelled comedian Louis CK tell the same story that he did to his kids. So I guess this is quite common. But the first big bereavement was my great grandfather died on my 10th birthday, and that was the first time that anyone like in my family had died, and I was just terribly upset about it. But all of that was kind of formative, and I did what everyone else did, which is I took this information in, I was very hurt by it, and then I squished it down as our society teaches us to. So, but I can tell you about the catalyst for the book if you like, because that was quite a bereavement that led to that.
Yeah. So I first just want to say that even though we're, on other sides of the world from one another, our cultures are very similar in how
Right.
they
Yes.
deal with death. And so one of the things I love about your book is one, for those of us who think the world revolves around us and everyone lives like us and everyone experiences everything
Yes.
like us, it made me so happy because my experience through, I mean, living on this planet, but also, trying to explore death in all its ways, I was like, yes, I'm so glad that she acknowledges that our way is a way. Also,
Right.
maybe not the right way. Here's some harmful things about it. And, you
Yes.
sort of dove into all the other billions of people on this planet and that they deal with it
Yeah.
differently. But yes, let's hear you share kind of the catalyst for the book and the big death, the terrible
Yeah.
Tuesday.
The terrible Tuesday. Yeah, Tuesdays in general are to be treated with caution, I think. But essentially, my partner and I had realized that his father had not been answering our emails, and it was quite normal for him not to answer them. But then his cleaner turned up on the day, and he wasn't answering the door or phone, and as we later found out, he had died. And he had died 8 days before. So he lain undiscovered for 7 days as we've been messaging and sort of waiting. Not worried, by the way. He was in his late 60s. This was not expected. And it's a little bit patronizing, I think, to be like, are you still alive every day? Generally people don't like that. So Yeah, a corpse of 8 days is pretty distressing, even before you get to how you felt about the person. And so it was a bad Tuesday. It was a very bad way to uh, sort of be introduced to dealing with a body, because generally, if you are the person who's dealing with the body or finding the body, it's usually because they have chosen to die at home, whereas he didn't choose to. So it was a very traumatic day. And really, what led to it was the months after this, where my partner, whose mother was a therapist, he dealt with it very well, sort of very stoically, and he just seemed to process his grief and sort of begin to move on, though I'm sure he still, feels the loss. Um, I did not do that. I think for me, one of the problems was that he was my partner's dad. And I wasn't really sure if I had, this sounds so terrible now, but if I had the right to grieve. We do kind of have this grief hierarchy that really is in place because of capitalism. I think it's essentially, do you have the right to, are you just pushing your luck if you ask for if you ask for some time off work? But either way, I think I found the decision to not to do any grieving and just be strong for someone else was also a convenient way to not do the work that grief requires. So I kind of got sent home from work because I was in such a state. I was only there for the last couple of weeks, though, before I became a freelancer. So at that point, I was working from home. And I didn't do any work. All I did was stalk everyone I knew online, because did you know that anyone you're not looking at might be dead? I mean, that is true, right? And I see you nodding because it's true, but it's really weird to live your life A, thinking that, and B, thinking it's your job to check on everybody. So I was like messaging people, waiting for the 2 blue ticks and all of this. And it was quite a long time before I realized that I hadn't been going outside and that I had developed agoraphobia. The way I finally realized it was I knew I hadn't been outside, and I went to the window and I went, oh, and shuddered in disgust and got away from it. By the way, please enjoy when you read this bit of the book. Please enjoy my undiagnosed ADHD. I had no idea at the time. Now it's quite obvious. It was that and agoraphobia on top. So I got to the point where I realized I had agoraphobia. And so I Googled how to get over agoraphobia, and it just told me to go outside. Have you ever heard anything so rude in your life? I was fuming about it. Because I thought, I genuinely was like, it'll tell me to have some vitamin C or something. It was like, no, go outside, should be fine. And it wasn't fine, it's awful. So here's where I learned what agoraphobia is. It's not exactly that you're afraid of outside. It just means when you go outside, you have a panic attack. So you bargain with it and you go, okay, I won't go outside, or I won't go outside at this time of day. And essentially you bargain with it, your life shrinks, and then you become like me and afraid to even go to the window. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to go and buy a sandwich, right? This is all I wanted, was to go and buy a sandwich. And I went outside, and it was amazing how immediately
Mm.
the air was just really thick. And essentially, I was experiencing what I now know is mortal terror, because that's all a phobia is, apparently,
Yeah.
is you take all of your fear of death and then you channel it into something you can control. Like, I can get away from a spider, I can get away from a clown or whatever. So I managed to get to the supermarket, where I remember trying to choose a sandwich. And I remember distinctly looking at the triangular packets and going, I'm never going to make it. I'll drop it, it'll be crazy. So I just grabbed a baguette. And then this really nice woman who works there, I'm so embarrassed even remembering this. She came up to me, I think she's trying to offer me a discount on cookies or something. And I went, no, and I threw the sandwich and I ran home. And I was told to make this chapter less funny, but as you can see, I'm still laughing about it all these years later. And I sort of looked at myself through the eyes of my cat, because my cat was totally judging me. And I really thought about Mexico, actually, because I used to live there and I'd seen the Day of the Dead over and over. And I thought, okay, so they saw death and threw a party, and I've just thrown a sandwich. So something's gone wrong, something's gone awry here. And I just, like any journalist, got curious and I Googled death festivals around the world. And I found out that we are very much the odd ones out in, as you say, the culture that we share. I narrowed it down to 7 different death festivals that I could go and visit to work out essentially how they did that, because it was very clear to me even from the beginning that there's no, they're not as afraid of death in that culture. That's just nonsense. That's just, the mystical, magical foreigner. I knew that wasn't it. So essentially the difference is we're dealing with it badly and other people are dealing with it well. Is that true? And if so, how are they doing it? So yeah, I just became obsessed with the idea and I decided to write this book. And my partner came home and had to listen as I told him, I know I have agoraphobia. I failed to get to the supermarket, but I'm going to go to 7 countries, and this makes sense somehow. So yeah, that was kind of the catalyst for it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you definitely threw yourself in, and I don't know if there's something to that, right? When it's so extreme that it's almost like whatever protection mechanisms we have in our brain, they just are like, well, this person's not trying to survive, so we'll
Right.
just let them go. So yeah, I wanted to read this little bit that is actually later in the book, but kind of like I guess starts to pull everything together, which
Mm.
is okay. So you say, except we're not keeping death at bay. Not really. Death has no idea what we're doing and couldn't. I think it's safe to say, give a flying farting fuck. All we're truly keeping at bay is the madness of knowing it's coming. So, so,
Yeah.
so you're afraid to leave your house. You're afraid of death. You're checking on everyone you know and love, and maybe just people you remember from your life. You decide to get on many planes, and put yourself in, risky situations by not having a safety net, just putting yourself out there. So, can you kind of talk through how the experiences you had at these death festivals maybe kept you going through
Mm.
that, whether it crept up again or not? But I mean, you didn't just you went out, you came back, you went out again. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, I didn't really
Yeah.
go into this. I didn't really pull back the curtain and let everyone see, how the sausage gets made. But this took me several years.
Yeah.
Not least because a lot of the festivals happen around the same time. So it was, yeah, the final year was definitely the busiest travel wise. And I mean, not least as well because I was running a whole side business where I was doing lecturing and stuff in order to save up for it because I didn't want to accept any freebies because I didn't want to have anyone pressuring me to say certain things. So yes, it took a while, and I think that was a really good thing because every single festival taught me a different thing. I kind of came away with a different lesson each time. It's actually why I went to Mexico first, because I speak the language, I'm familiar with the culture, even though I went to a different part than the one I lived in. But yeah, each one gave me something different. So with Mexico, I went there and again, it's so remedial when I read back over it now where I was still in active grief. I was I got very sad actually while I was there because I felt like I couldn't access what these people were accessing because I don't literally believe that people are coming back to visit for 2 nights as the belief goes. And I was there for a while before it dawned on me that I'd missed the point completely. Completely. It was there that I learned that the real point of having a death festival is essentially to pay tribute to the fact that when someone dies, your love doesn't actually go anywhere. It just sits inside you and it's very painful. And one of these phrases that comes from either here or North America, I don't know where it was coined, but you hear people saying grief is love with nowhere to go. And we'll give it somewhere to go then. Like, why are we acting like this is something that's not possible to deal with? You actually don't have to literally believe they're coming back. The act of, pouring someone a drink, making a little altar for them, having this just a ceremony for the idea that they're visiting, essentially gives your love somewhere to go. It gives you a moment where you can look after them and think about them and talk to them and things. And so that was like the first most basic thing I learned was I spend a lot of this book being wrong. And then later I'll find out I was wrong. And instead of going back and editing it, I just leave it in there and let everyone think I'm an idiot until I've worked it out. So there was that with the Nepal one, the second one was I don't have to go through all of them, but that one was where when it's this festival, it's actually called the Cow Festival, where everyone who's lost somebody that year parades through the street with kind of a big effigy of the person they've lost, and there's music and dancing and comedy. And I think what I learned was that it's impossible to feel like you're alone
Mm.
when you're surrounded by people who are there going through the same thing. And when you're not with people, that is a lie that grief tells you. You are the only person who's going through this. No one can possibly understand. Please don't bother them. So, that was clearly nonsense. And the Italian one, which is where in Sicily, where it's so great. It's kind of like Santa Claus is coming to visit, but instead of Santa Claus, it's your dead relatives. And instead of leaving you presents under a tree, they hide them around the house. So there's like a treasure hunt. And that's where I realized, oh, wow. So that means they can easily mention them because they're associated with a gift and not, in my culture, my family, you mention someone who's dead, you have to go silent and look at the floor and be sad for a second. I'm like, really? Is that it? Is that it? You spend your whole life trying to be remembered, and then when you're gone, all anyone wants to say is very sad. Like, come on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so each one really, really taught me something different. But of course, I mean, I suppose it's two of the last ones, which is in Madagascar and Indonesia, where the corpses are actually part of the celebrations. That's the one I get asked about that a lot, because obviously it's most people don't say I'm just gonna go to the Southern Hemisphere to hang out with some corpses, but that's what
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a part in the book where you get kicked in the head with people who are carrying their dead relative.
I did
And
get hit in the head by a corpse. Yeah, I did. Like, which is very strange. If you were to skip to that bit from the bit at the beginning where I was frightened to go and get a sandwich, and then I get hit in the head by a corpse, and I'm like, funny. It's quite a journey there.
yeah, it shows just yeah, I mean, even just in North America, in Europe, we focus a lot on, enjoying the thrill of death in like movies, right? Or in haunted
Oh, yeah.
houses, or we do come close to the, impressions of a dead body, but it's never a dead body. And there's
Dead
a
girl.
part of us that's like, this is scary because it's a dead body and that could hurt us, or I don't even know
Ouch.
what we think is going to happen to it, kill us, right?
Unless you
Um,
eat it,
yeah,
which is not advisable.
yeah.
Really, what's it going to do? There's no, yeah. The strangest thing about those festivals where people were, I mean, in Madagascar, the bodies they took out were wrapped in a shroud, and they wrapped them in a new one. In Tanah Toraja in Indonesia, it is like people's dead, dry faces, and I saw people running up to them and sticking a camera in their face like that, and you can see on the screen that it's a FaceTime call, and you can see someone going, and they're so happy to see them again. And the
Yeah.
strangest thing about it is like how ordinary it is so
Yes.
quickly, under 10 minutes, and it's completely ordinary that you have a dead body looking at you. Well, not looking at you, I suppose that's just me. It's all about me. No, I'm looking at it. It is just chilling.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's almost like I don't know, you almost feel cheated. Like I spent all my time being so frightened of the idea of even like I remember as a kid thinking that if I saw a dead body, I would be messed up for life. And
Mhm.
it's just not like that, particularly when the dead body in question is not there for a reason that you or I might see a dead body here, probably is to do with trauma because someone's just dropped dead unexpectedly
Absolutely.
or something. Whereas there, they've been taken out and given new clothes, and they're doing FaceTime calls, and they're showing them around the village and letting them see. Because, I mean, this is the main thing I learned about that death festival. I think this is the main thing that we get wrong, which is that we think that when you die, you lose all your power. And, I suppose that's literally true when you live in a capitalist society and you're valued on what you can do and produce. And more than one American has said to me, you can't do things when you're dead. And expecting me to go, oh, you're so right. I'm going to stop writing this immediately. Whereas in those cultures, when you are praying for health or, good grades or whatever, you are not praying to God. You're praying to your ancestors, and their job is to put in a good word for you. So you have to keep them sweet, right?
Yes.
Because if you don't, they'll make your crops fail, or make your buffalo run away or something, which someone told me their grandmother did to them because he disrespected her when she was dead, made the buffalo run away. And I think the main thing that kind of gave me was realizing that these people have their physical deaths years before their social deaths. They're still part of the community, which is lovely. However, here it is pretty much the opposite. Because there was an interview in the book where this palliative care consultant told me that people say that, people who are dying say, I feel like I'm dead already, because people don't want to see them, because they're so frightened to look at them. So we are essentially socially killing our loved ones early,
Absolutely. Yes.
robbing them of life because we're so afraid. And so when I went there and realized how ordinary it is to be around a dead body, I felt kind of cheated.
Yes.
Like, wow, I've been giving this so much importance. Think of all the damage I could have done later, which I won't do now. But yeah, and I thought some people might be upset to read that and realize, oh God, I did do that to my mother, whatever. It's like, yeah, you did,
Yeah.
but the dead people, don't worry. Listen,
Yeah.
you're not shot,
Yeah.
doing public.
It really shows us, as humans, we make up stories, right? And those cultures have chosen those stories, and how beautiful and valuable. And in our capitalist society, we chose these stories, and how harmful and how separating. And even just, I wanted to chat a little bit about privilege, because
Mhm.
the idea is we would be traumatized if we saw a dead body, because we have the privilege that there are not dead bodies around us all the time, right? We
Right.
don't live in countries where literally there are dead bodies all the time. We've seen people, it's not something that we're
Yeah.
accustomed to. It would be a shock, right?
Oh, yeah.
Almost like this
Absolutely.
idea of when you drive by like a car accident or something, I remember my mom being like, don't look, right? Like
Mhm.
just don't
Yeah.
don't see it. But
Yeah.
there's a part of the book you're talking to Sarah Chavez, I think it is.
Oh, yeah, Sarah Chavez. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I was really happy to see you guys having this conversation around, the honoring or the taking care of a body when it dies, and how
Yeah.
someone like a trans woman who maybe doesn't have an advance directive, their wishes to be prepared or treated as a woman at the end of their life in death might not be honored. And,
No,
having these
they
conversations, I just realized like all of these injustices, all of these harms that exist in our living life, they also follow us into death. And
absolutely,
I wondered,
absolutely.
like, how have you seen that? Is there, even since the book, have you noticed the ways in which we, whether it's marginalized communities or even just like indifferences, how we treat dead bodies or think about them, or even talk about them?
Yes, it's always been connected to privilege, to be honest, because generally, if you look at societies where, either our society before capitalism got its hands on death, whose job was it to look after the dead bodies? It was women. In India, for example, whose job has it traditionally been to look after the dead bodies, the lowest caste.
Mm,
So it's usually palmed off onto the people society doesn't like very much. And I always think that's quite interesting because, it's not as if men have had to do difficult jobs as well, but hunting and going to war have glory attached to them.
yes.
Cleaning, raising babies, and cleaning corpses really doesn't. So you
Right.
can already see it throughout cultures and history. But I think for me, the privilege question that really interested me while I was writing the book is that I sort of noticed in my research that there are these three death movements that are booming at once, and they have unbelievably uniform demographics. So it's like transhumanism, which
So
is the
glad you
science.
brought that up.
Oh yeah, it was. I mean, when I interviewed the guy who is,
Talk a little bit
the
about that for people who maybe haven't heard that term before.
transhumanism, it's essentially the desire to eradicate death by ourselves becoming robots. So Christians have the second coming, they have the singularity, which is this day when robots and humans will be indistinguishable. I just hope once we're there, I just hope we're better than my printer because it's rubbish. But I interviewed this guy, and first of all, his name is Zoltán István, which is an amazing name. It's Hungarian.
Very Hungarian, yes.
Yeah, so Hungarian. But first I was like, it does sound kind of like a robot name. And then I realized that's just my lack of understanding of Hungarian language. And he opened his front door like this, because he has a computer chip installed in his hand. And it was fascinating to speak to him, because I said to him, why is this movement so white and male?
Yes.
And he jumped on this. He said, well, we've had a couple of people of color interested. However, he really wanted to understand why women weren't interested. And I read this part of the book, and I've never not laughed. So forgive me, it's going to happen. So he ran for president a while ago because his wife told him to get a job, and that's the job he decided he wanted. So the confidence is interesting. And he publicized this movement and his idea of running for presidency by driving around the States in a bus shaped like a giant coffin. And he said to me, he said, I could barely get any girls on my bus. We had an open invitation to travel with us. So we had an open invitation for anyone to travel with us. We had a constant influx of guys, but it looks terrible if you only have guys traveling around in a coffin bus. And I just started laughing because I'm so professional. So I just laughed, and he looked at me and he was like, if you have ideas, tell me. We are all at a loss. And I sat there and just looked at him for a second. I was like, where to start with why the ladies aren't forming an orderly queue for the coffin bus? How am I supposed to explain it to this guy? How am I supposed to explain the way death hovers over women in a way it
Yes.
just doesn't for him? And, he was telling me that day that he sees not investing in life extension, to not die of cancer. That's a civil rights issue. This was a few weeks after what happened at Charlottesville, because people were peacefully protesting white supremacy. This
Mm-hmm.
was, not long before the situation we have now, where girls and women are dying because of ectopic pregnancies, that we're never going to be a child, and they're allowed to die because they won't have abortion. And I sort of thought, what? And eventually the only words I could get out, I just went, I suppose it's that we don't believe you. Like, if you're not bothering with all of that, like, it's just, and this is the thing. We've got a situation, particularly in the States, where, there is a lot of fear, a lot of guns lying around. People who are Black are many times more likely to die of firearms. We've got people of color are way more likely to die in childbirth or during surgery. We've got, these. So this is where the whole we are equal in death. Not really. Not really. If some of us are getting there earlier because of the color of our skin, or whether or not
Nothing
we
to
have.
do with healthcare, right?
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly the thing. And also, and
So,
I'm sitting there very privileged because I've got free healthcare, and I'm talking to someone who could go bankrupt if they get cancer. So,
yes.
there's layers and layers of it. So yeah, there's yes, it's hugely, and like I said in that same chapter, we've got the white men are in the transhumanism. We've got Santa Muerte, essentially praying to death. That is mostly working class people, and then death positive, which I guess you and I would probably fall into. And guess what? We're pretty typical. It's mostly white women.
Yes.
So yeah, it definitely comes into it a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And even that term has its own controversies around it because it typically is white women, right? And coming from place of privilege to talk about this.
Absolutely.
So okay. So you're going on this journey. It's over a number of years. Your own like I don't know if evolution is the right word, but your own like processing of death and grief and oh my gosh, I've missed out on all this stuff. But I mean, probably every day since you still think about this, right? Like this is probably still so much a part of you didn't just like write the book, close it up, and then never thought about death again.
I really tried to get death off my desk. And I was trying to do a PhD, and I was trying to come up with all these things. And eventually I was like, fine, look, I'm obviously going to do a thing about death anxiety and fraudulent mediumship. That's obviously what's happening. Like, I just stopped trying to get it off my desk. It's like, I know who I am.
Yeah. And so how do you feel? How do you sit with death now? And maybe it's different than it was yesterday, and later today you might feel differently, but how do you feel about your own death today in this moment?
I mean, I'm
What
not
comes
looking
up?
forward to it exactly, but it's more, okay, there's a few things. First of all, I know probably what it will be of, because we only really die of three things in the West: heart disease, cancer, and stroke. Half of all the world's humans die of one thing, and it's heart disease. One in two people gets cancer. Stroke is very common. These are the three things that we die of. I even interviewed a doctor who is he's the guy in the States who's injecting older people with young people's plasma.
Right.
And he didn't make it into the book, even though it was a great interview. But I said, so he was talking really passionately about life extension. And I said, okay, so what are we going to die of then in this case? And he listed out cancer, heart disease, and stroke, as if he was the first person to say it. I said, did you just say cancer, heart disease, and stroke? The same thing we die of now. And he was like, oh, yeah. Dude, so there's that. I'm not going to be shocked by it. I think the one thing I know won't be different is the pain involved will be horrendous. But I'm just much happier to look at it now. I was thinking about this, and do you remember the story of Medusa? I think we all learned it when we were at school. It's the Greek myth about the woman with the snakes for hair, and if you look
Hmm.
at her, you turn to stone. It's kind of like that. That's sort of what death has always been. Don't look, don't look, don't look, because something terrible will happen. And I've gone, hi. It's just a lazy with pets in her hair. It's fine. She's just a lady. It's not, you know what I mean? It's not,
Yeah.
I don't think she's hot or anything, and I don't want to be her friend. But it's just, I don't know, it's not something that I have to avoid looking at or making eye contact with anymore. And that makes things a lot easier. I asked
Hmm.
the vet point blank, what's going to kill my cat? And she just immediately said, oh, kidneys. Yeah. She said, essentially, house cats, we look after them so well. There's no AIDS, there's no there's no cars to run them over. Essentially, their parts wear out, and it's usually kidneys. Great. Now I know. It's good to know. So that's really how I feel about it now, is I don't feel much at all about it. It's just there and it's a fact. And I'm not excited about it, but it also allows me to think about it. It allows me to think about what happens when, if my partner dies. He's male and he's older than me, so it's likely he's going first, right? He's actually said he'll never forgive me if I go first. And he's right, because I can think about my life beyond it,
Hmm.
in practical terms. Whereas for him, the idea is just, no. So yeah, that's really the main difference, is I'm not hiding from it anymore. And it frees up a lot of time, and it
Yeah.
just makes everything generally less anxious, I guess.
Yeah. One of the things that I was really struck by in my own sort of journey through this, which is still very new, is that, death, someone dying, is very different than grief,
Oh
right?
yeah,
Like it's not, there's people who, death doulas, but there's also grief doulas, and they're very different, and they,
yeah.
approach it in a very different way. How has grief changed for you, or even your relationship with those who have died, in your own ways after experiencing some of these things that you may have rolled your eyes at before? Am I wrong in like sensing that maybe through these experiences, in your writing that I don't know if the word spiritual is right, but sort of found a place in your own way to like interact with the dead? But
Yeah.
still honors this, that people are dead and they're dead.
Oh, I certainly haven't, I thought I would end up building, like, Day of the Dead shrines and stuff, and I still don't, because that's still not my culture. And as much as it resonates with me, it doesn't occur to me to do it the way it occurs to me. Oh, it's about time to start buying Christmas presents. So,
Yeah.
but I think there's a few ways. I think I understand now that grief is, it's on your plate. You have to eat it. It can't get
Mm.
off the plate any other way. It's like put it in the bin, it's like, no, and just comes right back, right? So there's that. But I think the really important thing I learned about grief is that it doesn't heal like a cut.
Mm.
And that was a big mistake I made before. Like, if I had, like, my grandfather died last year before. I'm really confused because it's January, but yeah, my God, year before last. And I burst into tears about it 2 days ago. And before, I would have thought that meant there was something wrong with me, because
Mm.
meant to get better and better and better, right? Like a cut. And now I know it comes in waves. I know it's to do with other things. And I also celebrate it when I feel it because, I said in the book that like grief is the small print of love. It's right there in the small print. It's coming unless you go first. So I genuinely celebrate that feeling a bit more now because it just feels like saying hi, saying hi to that person. But it really hurts, and I think I can't even describe how different the experience of grief is when you stop fighting the actual experience. You do just sort of have
Mm-hmm.
to happen. It's like, if someone throws a bucket of water over you, you can't be like, I didn't want to be wet. Be dry, be dry, be dry. It'll dry. Just, just
Yeah.
be in this moment. So I just think that's mainly it, is not fighting it, and also understanding that it's essentially a flip side of a thing that you were extremely lucky to have. Also, can I tell a really short story about my
Of course.
grandfather?
Yeah.
The last time I saw him, he'd lost his mobility at this point. So he was sitting in a chair and he was looking out over, they've got this incredible view of the ocean from this hill they live on in Wales. And I was chatting away to him and he just looked really sad. And I said, "Are you sad?" And he looked really shocked to be asked something so directly. And then he went, "Yeah, I am sad." And I said, "Why are you sad?" And he said, "Because I I want more time, and I want to write another book, and I want to spend more time with you all, and I want to go on holiday and all of this stuff." And he listed all these things that he'd already done and he just wanted more of. And I was just overjoyed after that, genuinely. And I said at the funeral, like, he didn't list one regret. He didn't list one thing that he hadn't done that he wished he had. It was all just stuff he wanted more of. And we could all be so lucky to be sad like Eric. That's my dream, is to have that sadness one day.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's what I think of when I feel grief.
Yeah. But has that also helped you? I mean, I would never say you need to make more of your life because I'm pretty impressed by what I do know of you. But like you should do something crazy. No, I already said
Erica,
that.
we're
Already
maybe get
doing
out of
it.
here at some point. Go on holiday, Erica, finally. No, I came
Um,
back. I finished it right before COVID, and I said, I never want to travel again. And then the world shut down.
wow.
Was that me? I'm sorry.
All powerful. But
Yeah.
like being so, conscious of death, um, does that make you sort of, I mean, jump in a little more to things? Even if you were someone who did that before, do you just think of your grandfather and his wanting more of the things that felt so good? Do you sometimes just think, oh, I'm gonna take it. I'm gonna have this moment, or I'm gonna do this thing because if at the end I would just want more of this. Does that come up with you?
I don't do it more only because I did do it before, but because I was afraid.
ADHD
There's that too. Yeah, let's be
extreme.
honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite like, "Oh, that thing, oh, that thing." So I was doing it already, but I think a lot of it was about fear, and it was about um, a lot of the way I used to do it, because I was aware of death in like a bad, scary way. It was this quite arrogant thing that writers and artists and photographers, what we all do is, as a moment goes by, we're like, "No, it's mine, and I'm keeping it, and I'm going to describe it, and I'm gonna put a filter on it, and I'm gonna keep put it on my wall, and then that moment is mine." No, it isn't. It's gone, and it's fine.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's more. I definitely approach even the cool things that I do. I approach with less anxiety. But yes, also I did so much travel for this book that I really think it could be a long time before I even start to feel bad about. Oh, so many carbon emissions. I'm sorry, the planet, but but yeah, absolutely. I think it's only changed in as much as it's changed the feeling around it. It's more about excitement than it is about terror now. I've essentially
Mm.
net decreased my terror. I should add, by the way, that every time pretty much I've seen like a sum up of my book, or if someone sent me a review or something, I do not read reviews. A lot of people will describe it as, "Oh, she went to 7 death festivals to heal her grief." And I was like, "No, I didn't. I did not." I was like, how many times must I say this was not Eat, Pray, Love with corpses? It was, if anything, it was an attempt to intellectualize it so that I wouldn't have to deal with the grief at all.
I love
And
it.
that worked eventually. Eventually, I think it, healed my grief the way time does anyway, but also by healing that perspective and making me think now I want to do things because I'm excited, not because I'm scared.
Yeah.
But I swear I did not do this to heal myself.
So I'm going to read
100%.
one last quote from the book.
Sure.
And then if there's anything you want to mention from the book or even just some parting words for listeners about death, about anything really, I'll let you have that.
Mhm.
But this is, it was like at the end of the day, you were with Eric, one of your many tour guides, which it really made me feel like the world is such a better place when you're like finding all these people to just like take you through all these situations. And I mean, obviously, there were things that happened and didn't go as planned. And I'm sure you had moments that didn't make it to the book where you're like, what am I doing? I almost died.
Yeah.
But there's this moment where, it's the end of the day and he sighs into the darkness as if taking in a humbling, sweeping view, tilts his head towards me and says, "It goes so fast, this fucking beautiful life." And yeah, that just really, like, I just read it a bunch of times and I just loved that because it encompasses so much in like one sentence, in one moment within this one story of one day and this one festival. And it does go so fast, this one beautiful life, right?
Yeah, well, I just turned 40, so I'm now starting to feel time speeding up. As you know, old people complained that it was 1970 yesterday. And there's a simple mathematical reason for that, is that every moment that we experience becomes a smaller and smaller percentage of our life, I guess. Whereas when I was in a car for 3 hours as a child, that was basically child abuse. It was like it was
Half your
10 years.
life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, yeah, it really does. And that moment was amazing because he was staring out at total blackness because we were in Lala's house in the highlands of Madagascar. There's no electricity. It was pitch dark. And I could just about see him just lit by the fire. And he was just like, ah, and he was so content. And that was also one of the few things he said to me only in English. Because that chapter is honestly, the notes I have for that chapter and all of the recordings, it is a mess of French, English, and Italian. So like about 2/3 of it is translated, but that he did say to me in English. I remember it, it's just like burned in my memory, that moment. And yeah, it does. Yeah, unfortunately, it does go quite fast. Particularly when you get to this point when you're, hopefully just about halfway, maybe less, who knows. But yeah, it does go fast. And I suppose the parting words I would say, it's difficult because I think a lot of people who come to your podcast are here because they are ready to look death and grief in the face. So annoyingly, I feel like my message is for the people who haven't found it yet, which is yeah, just do it. Just look in the face. It's fine. I promise you, it's actually not that bad. And I kind of just accept it as just a thing that is. And once you accept it, that it isn't like a good or bad thing, it becomes a lot easier. And it's not your fault. Like we were taught this as children. The conclusion to every story was essentially that death was for baddies. Or people, when we get older, it was for baddies or people too ugly to come to the front. It was just particularly. Do you ever see snakes on a plane?
No, too afraid.
Don't. It's terrible. Yeah, and I hate snakes, but essentially, the only people who survived were good-looking people. So death is for bad guys and uggos, essentially, is what we were taught. Thanks, Hollywood. And yeah, it's not true. It's actually for all of us. It's not a punishment. Death is
Yes.
not a punishment. It just is. So, yeah. So to the listeners who've already kind of accepted that enough to come looking for this, just try and get that message out there as best you can.
Thank you so much, Erica. This has been such a joy to chat with you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really nice. And I hope that the Canadian London is continues to be nicer than this one.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the We Are All Dying podcast. My hope is that something from my conversation with Erica today piqued some curiosity in your own life or got you thinking about death in a different way. I hope that it also leads to conversations. If you have someone that you think would be a great guest for the show or a topic you'd like me to look into, please let me know.